Next is discussion of the use tax. Mr. Drebel?
Good evening. We're going to talk today about the consideration of a use tax within the city of O'Fallon. This would be something that would have to go to the ballot, and we'll talk about kind of this proposed schedule if the council is in favor of this. Let's start with the very simple, what is a local use tax? In the simplest terms, a use tax is a sales tax that's applied to purchases of goods by Missouri residents and businesses from out-of-state vendors. The use tax is applied to the same type of products that you currently buy that a sales tax applies to. Any products that are exempt from a sales tax would still be exempt from a use tax. And the amount of the use tax is equal to the sales tax rate wherever you receive the product. So the difference is, if you go to your local retailer and you buy something from them, you're going to pay a sales tax. A business goes to your local, and I'll give you examples, goes to their local business and they buy something, they're going to pay a sales tax. But if they order it from out of state and it's shipped here, they're not paying a sales tax. The use tax evens that out, so you're paying the same amount whether you're buying it in-state or out of state. So it really does level the playing field between local retailers and out-of-state or online vendors. Particularly, this is effective in business-to-business transactions, and that's where most of these kind of purchases that would be affected by the use tax apply. Currently, 45 states and nearly half of all Missouri cities with populations over 2,000 have a use tax in place. This includes the state of Missouri, the county of St. Charles, the cities of Wentzville and Forestell. O'Fallon and some of our neighboring communities are some of the half that do not have them right now. So residents and businesses particularly are already paying a use tax if they live in the city of O'Fallon, if they're buying something. They're just not paying O'Fallon's use tax. They're paying the state of Missouri and they're paying St. Charles County, but O'Fallon is getting left out of that. How's the use tax calculated? As I said, use tax mirrors the sales tax. Whatever your sales tax rate is, your local sales tax rate is, your local use tax rate would be identical. If for whatever reason we had a half-cent sales tax that sunset at some point in the future, the half-cent would sunset on the use tax as well. Voters voted in a new half-cent sales tax to raise the use tax would raise correspondingly. So it's always equal to the sales tax. Out-of-state business purchases are always subject to a use tax. Consumer purchases, individual online consumer purchases in the state of Missouri exceeding $2,000 are subject to a use tax. So if you just go and you order, a book that, according to Missouri state law right now, would not be subject to a use tax. Local use taxes are collected and distributed by the state in the exact same manner as sales taxes. So right now, all the sales tax go to the state takes them and they redistribute them back to the city. Use tax works the same way. Use tax goes to the state takes it and redistributes it back to the communities. Just to make sure, because it is a little confusing, it's not a double tax. You pay one, you don't pay the other under any circumstances, so you can never pay both. So that's one of the things that people get stuck on with the use tax is, oh, well, I already pay sales tax. Never. You can only pay one or the other. The use tax applies out-of-state purchases where no sales tax was charged. Again, if you paid it for whatever reason in the sales tax, you wouldn't pay a use tax. This is kind of give you an example here. This is a business example. Acme Company, based here in the city of O'Fallon, goes to our local office supply store. They buy a supply of 10 computers. They're going to pay a sales tax on that at the register when they check out. Right now, if Acme Company makes the exact same purchase from Computer Warehouse of California and has those shipped from LA, which of course they offer free shipping, they're not paying the local use tax on that. So there is an incentive to that business right now to go and shop outside of the city of O'Fallon. The use tax levels that playing field to make sure that if they were to buy that out of state, they're paying the same amount as they would be here. Again, it's important to note that they should already be paying that use tax on the county and the state portion. So it's a relatively small amount, but for a city like O'Fallon, that small amount can add up and be a significant difference. For them, it's a relatively small amount. I'll give you another example here on this slide. If an O'Fallon business makes a $10,000 purchase today from a local O'Fallon retailer, the sales tax on the purchase would equal $795. If they were to go and buy that out of state, that same $10,000 purchase, their use tax as of today would be $595. The state's getting their money, the county's getting their money, the city of O'Fallon's not getting any use tax from that. With a use tax in place, it balances out. The use tax on that $10,000 purchase would be $795, just as it was if they would have bought it as the sales tax. The difference for them, relatively minimal, $200 on a $10,000 purchase, but there's still an incentive to get them to go out of state. The local use tax would be added on to current purchases that are already subject to it. So the nice thing about if the city were to move forward with a use tax is we're not really changing anything. If you're already paying a use tax to this county and the state, you're used to it as a business. And so we're not making things more complicated on them. Maybe making it a little more complicated on the state because now they have to send us funding too. But overall, it's the process is already in place. We're not creating anything new. It eliminates that discount, levels the playing field with our local businesses. Hopefully people will shop locally. And then for the city of O'Fallon, that $200 on that $10,000 purchase adds up. Right now, Missouri Municipal, as of this is 2015 estimate. So based on 2015, the Missouri Municipal League estimates a $2.98 million impact for the city of O'Fallon if we were to have a use tax in place. It's basically $3 million. On an $86 million budget, $3 million can make a lot of difference, and we'll talk about where that goes to here, where that could go to in a second. As I said, state law is going to dictate which vendors are required automatically to collect use tax. It's, if I remember correctly, any state that does business with the state of Missouri right now, or any business that does business with the state of Missouri is legally required to collect a use tax. If they don't currently, and there may be there's other factors I don't remember off the top of my head, but otherwise it's self-reported. So it's incumbent on the business to report that as part of their tax filing to the state of Missouri. Again, though, they're already required to do that today. We're not adding anything to them if we were to go forward with the use tax. For the average non-business consumer, again, it would be self-reported if they were to make a purchase totaling over $2,000. Otherwise, the use tax doesn't apply under current state law. So the overall impact on most residents at this point is very small. Some other key factors to continue. The use tax does not apply if it's from a Missouri retailer. So if a business buys something from a business in Kansas City, Missouri, they're going to pay sales tax at that business in Kansas City, Missouri. So use tax doesn't apply in that case. Even though O'Fallon wouldn't get the funding in that case, the money stays here in the state, and that's what the use tax is designed to do. We all know that eventually, maybe, the federal government's probably going to have to take a look at online purchases and sales tax and how that's collected online. There's no way to know where that's going to go. But one of the thoughts going forward is that the use tax would be a mechanism, because it is in place in 45 states already, it's already there, that the federal government might latch on to utilize going forward. It'd be incumbent on cities to have that use tax in place, so if the federal government were to change the law, make it more uniform across the country, that we would have a use tax in place so that we could participate in that in the future. Will that happen? There's obviously no way to know that, but we can at least be prepared for it if it does going forward. And again, it's possible at that point the federal government can say, okay, every city that has a use tax in place can do this, but if you don't, you can't. So that's why we might want to consider it at this point in time rather than wait in the future to see what happens. Get the mechanism in place so we're ready for whatever were to happen at the federal, and then potentially changes might have to happen to state law at that time too. Again, these are all hypotheticals, but it's something to think about as to why maybe we want to look at this now. Specific benefits for the O'Fallon, obviously the $2.98 million estimate that I gave you already, that was provided by Missouri Municipal League based on 2015 data. Other cities who have done this, I know went to several presentations, one specifically with St. Joseph, Missouri, which is relatively comparable in size to O'Fallon. They saw a similar impact on their budget when they passed a use tax as well. So qualitatively, other cities are saying, yeah, those estimates are pretty good. If anything, they might be a little bit low. Economic development-wise, this is going to help support our local businesses. We're taking away an incentive for people to go out of state by instituting use tax if we were to do that, if voters were to do that. If there's no O'Fallon retailer, which is very possible, especially for specialized equipment, it still might encourage people to shop locally. Maybe they're not shopping here in O'Fallon because we don't have that specific piece of equipment, but maybe they're going to St. Louis County or Columbia or St. Joseph's or somewhere, keeping it in the state of Missouri and keeping those jobs as local as possible considering the circumstances. It's a new tax line, essentially, so it's a diversification of the city's tax base. As the changes to the marketplace go forward, and we all are starting to see that already, diversification of income is obviously something to keep in mind, and this would be a way to do that. It does establish the use tax in case there's future legislation, future changes in federal or state legislation. O'Fallon would have that in place. Revenues generated by the use tax would go to the city's general fund, so it would be up to the city council to determine where that's going. As we go forward with this, though, there would be an education component of this to our residents, and we'll talk about the county, kind of how we're approaching this from a county standpoint. But I would recommend that the city council make a determination ahead of time of where they want that extra funding to go if it were to pass, so that residents know exactly what they're voting for. Street and road improvement and repairs would be something that I would recommend. I know Mr. Strahl would also recommend that you consider at that point going forward. But ultimately, obviously, the city council would make that determination. We would just want to make sure that our residents know that if this were to pass, this is what that funding would go to, and that the council's committed to that, whatever that is. As I mentioned, right now, there's only 2 cities in the county that have this in place, Wentzville and Forestell. So Mr. Strahl and I have been working with our neighboring cities, kind of looking at this from a bit of a global standpoint across the county. In fact, all of the boards of aldermen or councils for our neighboring cities are going to see a similar presentation to what you're seeing tonight. In fact, St. Charles already has, Lake St. Louis saw it last night, Weldon Springs saw it, and I think St. Peter's is going to see it next month, if I'm not mistaken. So our idea behind this is similar to what we did with that out-of-state use tax for vehicle purchases that we put in place a couple years ago. It was nice that in educating residents, we were all kind of speaking the same language and making sure that everybody understood the same thing, working under the same time frames. We think that approach might be effective in this because a use tax can be a confusing thing. It's not something that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. Business owners do, but residents specifically don't, and they're the ones that are going to be voting. So we want to make sure that, as much as we can speak from a consistent language as to this is what is what it is and what it's going to do and why it's important, that may help our residents understand where we want to do this, why we want to do this going forward. The timeline that the county has discussed as a whole is to utilize the August 7th, 2018 election. And the deadline to submit ballot language on that is May 29th of this year. So we have a little bit of time, but it's certainly time to at least start the discussion if we're going to move forward as a city. That would leave kind of our primary education campaign time being the summer of this year as well, between that May 29th and August 7th election. We think that from a communication standpoint is a decent time to do this and would allow us a reasonable amount of time to educate our residents going forward. So with that, if anyone has any questions for myself or Mr. Strahl, we'd be more than happy to answer them for you.
I have one.
Yes, sir.
It says, we clearly want to state what the revenues to be used for. Everybody knows that this council can change in every other year. Now, if this council decides that wants to go to, streets, does that stay with streets forever and ever? Or is it the choice of the council every time budget comes up?
Thank you for asking. That is a very good question, a very important part. Each year you guys do the budget for the general fund. You set the priorities for that year. So there is potential that can change in the future. That would have to be something that it would be a key part of our education campaign is the council has said that where this is going for 2018 or 2019, but future councils will make that decision based on what they feel is important. So that is absolutely a piece that we would have to make sure to get the message out. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Mr. Kuhn?
Thank you. You talk about the education process on this, specifically for the general public. I'm not sure maybe I missed it, but would the city be trying to promote that type of education, or was this something that the council ought to consider, maybe appointing a citizen board like we did for Prop 1 or other propositions?
The city, and Mr. O'Keefe can certainly jump in and correct me if I say this incorrectly, the city has the ability to educate our residents about a particular issue on the ballot. We can in no way, city staff can in no way endorse or oppose that, but we can say, and this is what we've done with the previous propositions that we did for the parks and for the police department, put out educational materials that explain very clearly what the issue is and what it's meant to do. Having a separate citizens committee would allow for a campaign separately to endorse that and a vote yes campaign, so to speak. So that would be something that would purely be at the discretion of any individual to create, and you'd be more than welcome to. Elected officials obviously do have the ability to also go out and promote for a particular ballot issue. It's just from a city staff point, we can only educate. So yeah, having an outside committee would certainly help that as far as going forward.
So if a group of citizens, independent of this council, elected to gather together and promote this for August, that would be beneficial?
I would think that's a fair statement, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Schwenkert?
On the ballot, you're saying August 7th. Is there a price difference between August 7th ballot and November ballot? Would there be a price difference on putting that on there?
I do not know that information. I can get it for you.
I would like that information. And then is there also a difference of percentage versus the August ballot versus November ballot of percentage of people of what it would take to pass it versus August ballot versus November ballot?
My understanding is it's 57% for both. Is that correct, Mr. O'Keefe?
50.1. It's a simple majority.
50.1.
It's a simple majority. Okay.
Yeah, simple majority, no matter when. And I do not know for certain, and you can get the data, but my guess would be the election cost would be the same in August and November, because generally it's apportioned among people on the ballot, entities on the ballot, based upon their share of the overall registered voters participating. So, or eligible to participate. It's not voter turnout. It's, Fallon has something on, will we bring 65,000 registered voters, okay, versus the total number that's cumulative. That's the way it's priced. I don't think it'll be any different between August and November, but we can check and find out.
Yeah, if you could find that out from Mr.
It's a
Chris.
simple majority, no matter when it's put on.
And Jeff, I really think they looked at it because I know Mr. Straw's been meeting with the other city administrators, and I'll guarantee you they have looked at that, what the cost difference is and everything else throughout the
And
counties.
voter turnout's different.
Yes.
Do you have that, David, or?
We didn't specifically talk about the price difference. The idea for the August election was primarily not to get lost in the minutia of the midterm election, and we could focus on this, was part of the reason to get this going sooner than later.
Okay, and then my other question would be, I guess it'd be to this, Mr. O'Keefe, is I know you said, which Bill had a good question of each council would decide, but we've also done this when we did parks and stuff. If we do the ballot language to where it specifically goes to a thing, and that is what's voted on by the people, and our ballot language includes what it's going to go to, as you mentioned, streets, then I believe it stays with streets forever. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. O'Keefe.
It would certainly be more difficult to keep the tax and spend it on something else. Yes,
If we put that in the ballot language.
yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
That, of course, would deprive future elected representatives, such as yourself, from having the freedom to select just like you have now.
I understand it. We did that with parks also, and we did that with stormwater management. We did that for a reason, because it's such a need of money. I don't think the need of money of streets would ever go away. The city council, the reason I say that is that the city council does allocate every year. The city council, as it changes, every city council has the right to put it, one year we put 2 million in streets, and next year we put 3 million in streets. Next year, we put 1 million in the street. I think with an allocated fund, either way, it's gonna free up the money, which you put in the streets right now. I do not ever see that amount going down. That's why I think it would be, as you say, uniform to the residents and uniform to everybody. The streets is a major, major, major issue. So as it's allocated to the streets, and yes, you tie the hands of future councils, I don't think you're ever gonna go under that amount, because the money you're spending on the streets now, you would just allocate that towards something else. But that money would be ensured that the streets would be maintained to standards what the residents want.
Any other questions? Mr. Keown?
I'll just make the comment that I think the battle language should reflect the money going to the general fund and allow the opportunity, because we don't know, there's $3 million projected, but it could end up being, $18 million or some ridiculously high sum. And if we're forced to spend that on streets, I don't know.
I would say you're way off on 18 million versus.
I pulled a number out of the air.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you.